Thanks for having me. So many perspectives on data the whole day. Data here, data there, for corporations, for startups, for states, for everything. Now I'm adding yet another perspective, and I hope that some of you will listen to this and potentially rethink how you can use data for your local communities. So I named this talk, I'm giving it the first time in this form, to make data talk translated 3 times. Just very, very briefly, who am I? I'm a journalist originally, then I'm working for Deutsche Welle innovation projects in Bonn for the last 10 years. We're taking part in research projects funded by the EU, and we're looking into technology that could help the newsroom into reporting better. That is difficult work. It takes 3 years, you push a lot of paper, potentially something comes out, potentially not, and so on. And this is why I wanted to do something active, and so in 2010 I started to work on a small tool that helps journalists to visualize data very fast. You go in, you upload some data, you get a chart that you can publish. That's the idea of Datawrapper. There will be a workshop tomorrow because beside of this mentioning, I will not be talking about Datawrapper. Instead, the next 20 minutes will be a very brief update of what my community calls data-driven journalism. A lot of people say data journalism. I don't like that so much because it is journalism. It is journalism in providing a narrative so that I reach out to you and tell you what's happening. I reach out to you. And it's based stronger on data, but it's not about data. It's about you and me. It's about your benefits, about whether there's an opportunity, whether you should stay in the country or move elsewhere. Whether there's an economic crisis or a political crisis. That is what is important. So it's still journalism, but by the use of data. And I think there will be 3 translations which I cover in the talk. Let's, very briefly, this is what I conceived as a way of what is good data using, journalism using data could be in 2010. At the time, we organized a round table inviting journalists, and I was like, when I prepared for it, I had like a cinema poster, like my dream, like who should come, the New York Times, the Guardian, and so on, and they all came. That was surprising, because they were all lonely in their newsrooms. Journalists looking into data and mathematics and statistics and technology is a rarity up to this day, and that is a problem. It is like us not going deep enough as journalists. So that is the idea. You take data, you need to filter it, you need to look whether the data is actually right, then you need to visualize it to actually tell a story, but then put it into a story, translate it another time. That is the important part. You have to translate it 3 times, not just once, because otherwise you end up only with the specialists, only with very few people actually understanding it. So the acronym on Twitter for data-driven journalism is usually DDJ. And this is my very brief update from this year, the good, bad, and ugly. On the good side, around the world, in South America, in the US, in Europe, in Asia, we see teams going into data and unearthing stories that are amazing. That is at a level, there's a story from Reuters about the camps in Bangladesh that has better maps than anybody else has. They can tell better about the situation of the refugees by the research that they did in the newsroom. So that is amazing. What is bad is that I think the discussion that we lead currently, whether it's east or west, south or north, it doesn't matter, it is underserved by data. There's a lot of emotion, a lot of belief, but there's not enough data nurturing our beliefs. Like, development of prices, development of salaries. Let's talk about salaries. That's something, it's all dear to us, but we don't dare to talk about because we don't have the data. It could even be the salaries of men and women in the same company. There was a Google walkout quite recently regarding such topics about having data in a data-driven company. So, and there's something ugly. We don't have enough people covering data on behalf of smaller communities. Countries, the world, that is too big. That is too far away. It's great that they have good data journalism on the New York Times, but what is the benefit for people in Georgia? So that I find ugly, and I think we could change that potentially. So the first translation, which I only cover very shortly, I basically want to make one correction. This is a cover from The Economist. There's, of course, looking at the talks from today, quite a bit of value in data, of course. But I don't think it's oil, because it's the first resource for a new century that we can share. If I share the data that I have with you, I'm in the same position and you're in a better position. That is much different to oil. And we can all uplift ourselves. So this oil, data is in your oil picture is sometimes criticized in my community. That is data, and that is the problem with data. This is what I show in my trainings. It's a broken CSV, so somebody uploaded data into Excel, and it's broken. On the other side, it's very interesting data. It's data that is very often used for training people in statistics. This is a passenger list from the Titanic. Yeah? So you see what the problem is. Somebody needs to sit down and translate this. And it's worthwhile to translate it. That's the point. Too many people that should be arguing with data are driven away by something like this. Yeah? This is like, oh, this is broken, I need to call IT. And here it gets even worse. This is what is just one layer under the web pages that we're looking at all the time. You know, Facebook, Google, we all look at it. This is how they look, basically. So their code is driving it forward. And this is important that more people move into it, not driven away by not being a coder, but looking into it. Then the second translation is where it gets more interesting. I'm moving very fast because it's only 20-minute talk. Otherwise, I can actually get up and do a 1-week talk about data-driven journalism, but I spare you that today. So this is where we're going. Yeah, this is like the Model 3 from Tesla. This is what they're going to build into this thing. It's even bigger than your iPhone. It's really a massive screen showing you information. And I think we should use these kind of screens better. And my very basic advice that I took from Tufte, Edward Tufte is one of the writers of the most important data visualization book. Can you guys actually see? It's large enough, right? So always when you see a number, whatever the number is, ask compared to what? Yeah, your government says, oh, we're putting 100 million into kindergartens. How many kindergartens are there? How many kids are there? What are they getting per child? So data in itself needs to be compared to be understandable, to be part of our narratives. And I show you by example how quickly you can deceive with data. This is the Silicon Valley narrative in the sense that this is a hockey stick. Oh, it's going great, you know. We started with it that low and now it's going up, 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 up. So it's a hockey stick, you know. But I only need to add one more line and I change the picture. And that's my point about this visualization. So this is internet population. This is global population related to internet population with data from 2014. But you see my point. These are two lines to put something into context. And this is, you know, you won't remember potentially when you go home because it's not your community, it's too big, it's a world. But put these kind of simple transformations down for your audiences. I think you will make a point. And who's doing that in your newspaper, in your website? So there is a way to construct these pieces, and it's going along the journalistic question. I just mentioned it here. You know, you ask who or what kind of data do I see here? Is that data actually valid? Can it be true? How much? Where? When? How? Why? The how and why is difficult. It is extremely difficult. I can tell that we have a lot of refugees and migrants from south to north. But why they are leaving, I cannot tell. And I should be careful about trusting data, even machine learning and artificial intelligence, whatever, into answering human questions in a level that is not meant for technical answers. These are answers, you know, that you need to investigate and then potentially answer by heart. And here I show you an example of a very simple visualization showing the same thing from two perspectives. It was done by a public service agency in Germany, and some supermarkets actually stopped selling this spread. Very popular in Germany, it's very sweet, sugary, and here they show you what is in there. This is another view, and I would, if you haven't found Our World in Data, it's a website that is free to use. It's done by Max Rosa, who is an incredible researcher, and he takes a long look at things. This is just some of his findings, how the world has become a better place, how extreme poverty is going down, how democracy is kind of, well, in fighting mode. Colonialism went away. Child mortality has sunken to lowest levels ever. And so on and so on. So this is just another approach to data, taking a very long look in order to try to find the pattern. And it's always about patterns. Here's another approach, which I love this example. It's from the New York Times. It is an interactive chart where you are in charge. They ask you, under President Obama, the unemployment rate went up or down. When you do these tests, you find how less we know, how often we are just guessing what happened. The rest is just feeling, I don't like him, something like that. It should be more factual based. At least that should be part of it. So this New York Times format, which has by now been adopted by other newsrooms, you have to click on it, you have to sign your own line, and then you get shown whether you were right or wrong. And it's like that. The dotted line was my guess, and actually it was better. The unemployment rate went down. And I like these new ways of being in a dialogue. It's a difference to just me telling you and interacting with you. So that's just a pointer at how we can show. This is an older one that was one of my favorites, is by now broken and went away. But I ask you, why don't we have more of those things? Buying a house is for most people the biggest financial deal that they might do in their life, right? And good life is potentially around being able to pay it without breaking your neck working 60, 70 hours for 30 years. So that is a valid point. How often do you have valid discussions about this kind of deal that is in your future? How are you trained for that? How are you prepared for the fallacy, for the problem? This here is on one page, quite an interactive calculation that tells you whether it is better to rent or to buy. Yeah, you can put in all the variables, even if it's in dollar, doesn't matter. You can put it into the Georgian currency and get an idea. You're guided, it is helpful. That is just another step beside me just telling it's different. And this is just an example of something. So my dream about data visualization is that we can walk through our communities outside here. We all have these mini computers that are phoning back home to Google and Facebook and whoever. But that they serve us, that I can look at something, at a house, at an item, at a car, whatever, and get a layer of data that is for me. That is not trying to sell me something, but giving me the pros and the cons. Like not only the price and where I can get it, but what is the most recent, most common reason for a breakdown of this particular car? And what do other people say? Yeah? But in a valid way, in a way that is just for you. Just for you when you look up something like that. And that is not the case right now. Right now, most of this data is used to sell us more. And I think it's unbalanced. So, and now, I think we are heading for a new mantra of news media. So far, the mantra has been, tell me something new. So you wake up in the morning, what is happening? The farther it's away, the less it's interesting. The closer it gets, something happening on campus, interesting. But how about teaching me something new that is perfectly possible, that I use an explainer format to guide you through something that sounds complicated but isn't, and I tell you in 10 minutes to move you forward into it. And that is one of the earliest visualizations ever done. One needs to understand the context. They were done when people were thinking that customs were better for the country because otherwise it would be drained of all the money. Free trade at the time was something the kings didn't want. It only started with British doing trades with Portugal for port wine and other stuff that they found out, oh, we're getting up, both of us are getting up, instead of one draining us. That was at the time, from William Playfair, a really interesting way to show people. That was one of the first of these line charts. He's the inventor of line charts, one of the inventors. So, and I just want to close with some examples. There are more, and they're getting more, which is great, but they should be available in Georgia, they should be available in Ukraine, they should be available in Moldavia for local views of how you're doing and what your perspectives are. And it should not just be about buying more stuff, right? That is fine, it's all cool, but that is not all. It is we are underserved. So I want to look at 3 examples. One is Reuters, Life in the Camps, which I mentioned. Then a site with a peculiar name, The Pudding. It's 5 journalists getting some funding through Patreon and so, like they're looking into 5, 6, 7,000 that they can produce in a bit. They're doing amazing work with interactive charts, amazing, tons of it. And then finally my new favorite, which is Nicky Case. It's just one guy doing explainers, and they're quirky, they're looking strange, but they're super educative and fun to watch, and you learn a ton. So this is just a view at what they did at Reuters. And now look at this. They took aerial photos, then they put the data in there, and they looked at where there are water pumps and latrines. If the latrines are too close to the water pumps, they get an issue because people are getting ill, of course. So they really went into this. They sent down people to the ground. There are over 400, 500,000 people living in a terrain that was never meant for 500,000 people to live there. So at the end of the day, the journalists were able to do research on a situation that was better than anybody else in the field would have. So it was collaborative work for a large group of people, but it has a local focus. This is just some examples from the pudding. Looking at the time, I don't think that I can go into all of them, but make sure that you have a look at pudding.cool. It's amazing what you can do with data. There's a lot of entertaining stuff about music, about entertainment, about things going on, gender balance, and so on. One of the best collections and smartest ways of working with data. And then finally, let me mention Nicky Case. This is an interactive game talking about trust and how trust develops and how you should be trusting, whether you should be trusting others and what happens when you trust and the trust is not given back. So it shows you by theory, even in large scale, how this works in societies. It takes 10, 50 minutes, and for a reason it has been translated into tons of languages by other people because they were so happy about seeing this and learning about this. And Nicky Case has a point which is not meant for this story today, but it's strongly connected. Data in itself is a small piece of our experience. We need to do something in a first translation to connect it maybe into a visualization and put it together. But only when we combine it into something that speaks to you in another way, speaks to you, we have this meaningfulness. And a lot of the stuff is sold to even younger people like you as too complicated. You cannot do it. Only in Silicon Valley. Only Facebook, Amazon, Google can do it. That is not true. That is not true for data. That is accessible. You can do a lot with even small teams because the technology is there. You can publish to the world. So that is my point here. So what is next? I would argue that, and we can discuss later over the day, that we need community data editors. People who are looking just for activities, just for the city, into whether it's going up, down, or sideways. Whether the roads are getting better, whether the people doing better, whether the prices for rent are well managed, that they don't put too many shopping centers around the city and then the inner city is dead. That kind of stuff happened elsewhere, so how can we do better? That would be of interest, I think. And there's value in that. It's kind of reinventing the local newspaper. That's my point. I'm closing with an with a quote, and this is German, and so I translated it. It needs discipline to let yourself be guided by numbers and facts, but the alternative is irrationality or blind faith. A quantitative, evidence-based thinking is a basis for education, for intellectual life, including journalism. And now, we all have learned once not to believe in unicorns, astrology, and science from the gods in a rainbow. Now we should learn to assess risk through numbers and not on the basis of anecdotes or headline-grabbing events. And that's the point about data. And there are, just to give an example, there are people who are doing this. This is a picture. This is not Jean-Charles Minard. This is one of the ministers in France. And at the time, they had Minard as drawing maps. So when they were painted, they always made sure that the data visualization that were produced by Minard were in the picture. So they were put into the picture as a sign we're managing the state with the modern tools. So they all made sure that the data visualization was in. You need to see some of them. This is what Mina did. After he retired, around 60, 70, this is the guy who did the Napoleon map. Maybe you heard about Mina's Napoleon map. But I wanted to make a point that he did much more. And here's one example, what was possible in 1870, so no argument not to do it today. This is a look at the source of cotton at the time when the Americans fought for independence. This is a situation where most of the cotton is coming from the south. Then it needs to be resourced over the time, so there's more coming from India, and specifically more from Egypt. The British, in need of cotton, essentially founded an industry for cotton in Egypt. So you can see that you can see change even from a 100-year-ago map quite well. It's highly understandable. It rises your interest. Of course, needs more investigation, but that's my point, and that is possible. And that is why I'm saying we need to translate us 3 times. Thank you very much.